Many people don't realize how deeply intimacy functions as emotional expression for men. It often becomes the one place where they can finally exhale, let down their guard, and exist without performance. From a young age, many men are taught, directly or indirectly, that their emotional world must be contained. They hear messages telling them to be strong, stoic, unfazed, and tough. They are praised for independence but rarely encouraged to explore vulnerability. Over time, that conditioning creates emotional silence, and not because men lack feelings, but because they lack culturally acceptable spaces to express them. As adults, intimacy becomes the rare environment where that silence softens. It becomes the place where they feel a level of emotional safety they rarely find anywhere else. In moments of genuine connection, a man feels something that the outside world doesn't often allow him, a sense of being valued without having to perform, fix, provide, or win. He feels emotionally held instead of emotionally judged. That moment of closeness speaks to a part of him that has been ignored or muted for years. It communicates acceptance, belonging, and affirmation at a level that words alone often cannot reach. It is not the physical act itself that matters most. It is what the act symbolizes. It represents being wanted, chosen, and emotionally significant to someone. This is why intimacy can feel so grounding for men. The emotional pressure they carry, expectations, responsibilities, stress, unspoken fears, finds a moment of release not just physically but mentally. It's the moment they can stop trying to prove something. It's the moment they can stop protecting themselves from judgment. It is where their emotional guard, which has been trained to stay up everywhere else, finally lowers. And when that guard lowers, their humanity comes forward, their tenderness comes forward, their unspoken needs come forward. And for many men, they don't experience that level of openness anywhere else. It's also important to understand that this emotional connection through intimacy is not about dependency or weakness. It's about the human need for closeness. Every person, regardless of gender, needs to feel bonded, appreciated, and emotionally recognized. Men simply tend to link those needs more closely with intimate connection because that is where they feel safest being vulnerable. It becomes the moment when their heart and mind feel aligned, when the noise of the world quiets down long enough for them to feel emotionally connected rather than emotionally isolated. When intimacy is shared with presence, care, and mutual respect, it allows men to express feelings they rarely communicate verbally. I want to feel close to you. I want to feel valued by you. I want to feel safe with you. These are not statements most men articulate out loud, but they show up through their desire for connection. And when that connection is met with understanding instead of judgment, men open emotionally in a way that strengthens both their sense of identity and their relationship. This emotional expression through intimacy deepens trust. It helps men communicate more openly outside the intimate space as well. It makes them feel seen as whole people, not just providers or protectors. And that emotional recognition fuels their confidence, their emotional health, and their willingness to show up fully in the relationship. When a man experiences emotional safety, he becomes more honest, more expressive, and more compassionate, not because intimacy changed him, but because intimacy allowed him to be who he already is. Beneath the armor, so when men seek intimacy, it is rarely just about physical satisfaction. It is about emotional connection, acceptance, and safety. It is where they feel human in the most complete sense. Understanding this removes the stereotypes and replaces them with compassion. It helps partners see not just what men want, but why they want it, and that understanding becomes the foundation for deeper, healthier connection for both people. For many men, physical desire and emotional connection are intertwined in ways they themselves don't always understand. It's easy for the world to assume that men approach intimacy from a purely physical drive, but beneath that assumption lies a far deeper truth. When a man desires intimacy, he is often seeking something emotional, something grounding, something that reminds him he is not alone in the world. Physical closeness becomes a doorway into emotional closeness, and that doorway matters profoundly because men are often raised without many other paths to emotional expression. When a man feels connected through intimacy, he is not simply responding to biological impulse, he is responding to the longing to be close to someone he trusts. He is reaching for reassurance, for belonging, for affirmation. In those moments, the experience becomes more than physical, it becomes emotional validation. It communicates without words, I matter to someone, I am wanted, I am enough. And when a man feels that sense of acceptance, he relaxes in ways he rarely does in the outside world. Many men carry emotional pressure silently. They hold stress in their bodies. They take on responsibilities, expectations, and fears without speaking them out loud. So when they connect intimately with someone who cares for them, it becomes a release not just of tension, but of emotional weight. That sensation of being close, both physically and emotionally, acts almost like a reset. Their mind calms, their racing thoughts slow, and the emotional walls they keep up throughout the day soften. They feel understood without having to explain themselves. They feel comfort without having to ask for it. This emotional connection through intimacy also builds trust. When a man allows himself to be physically close to someone, he is also allowing himself to be emotionally vulnerable. Whether he realizes it or not, he is revealing parts of himself he often hides, his insecurities, his hopes, his need for affection. And when that vulnerability is met with care, not judgment, he bonds more deeply. He becomes more open, more communicative, and more present. The emotional connection strengthens not only the intimate relationship, but the overall relationship, because it gives him the confidence to share more of himself in daily life. What makes this connection powerful is not simply the act itself, but the emotional message behind it. When intimacy is approached with love, patience, and respect, it shifts from being an act of desire to being an act of connection. It becomes a way to say, I'm here with you, I trust you, and you are important to me. That emotional significance is what makes intimacy deeply meaningful for men. When the emotional bond is strong, the physical experience becomes richer. Men feel more secure, more grounded, and more capable of giving affection in return. They become better communicators, better partners, and more emotionally aware. The connection becomes a two-way exchange of love, not a one-sided moment of desire. Emotional closeness enhances physical closeness, and physical closeness enhances emotional closeness. They feed into each other in a healthy, powerful cycle. This is why understanding men begins with understanding their emotional wiring. When men seek intimacy, they are often seeking emotional unity. They are seeking the comfort of closeness with someone who sees them beyond their role, their responsibilities, or their mistakes. They are seeking a moment of peace in a world that demands constant strength. And when partners recognize this deeper emotional layer, intimacy becomes an opportunity to strengthen the relationship rather than simply fulfill a need. So when men crave physical connection, it is rarely just about the body. It is about feeling aligned, connected, valued, and loved. It is about touching someone they trust and feeling that trust in return. It is about turning a moment into a message of emotional truth. And when that truth is embraced with compassion and understanding, both partners grow stronger together physically, emotionally, and spiritually. When a man experiences intimacy, his body undergoes a powerful chemical shift that affects far more than physical pleasure. It becomes an emotional reset, a biological grounding, a psychological release. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, surges through his system, lowering stress, easing anxiety, and creating a sense of closeness that he may struggle to access in any other part of his life. This hormone doesn't simply make a man feel good. It makes him feel connected. It tells his brain, you are safe, you are valued, you belong. That's why intimacy becomes such a profound emotional anchor for men. In a world where they often feel pressured to stay tough, collected, and in control, these hormonal shifts allow them a rare moment of genuine emotional calm. Alongside oxytocin, dopamine rises reward, motivation, satisfaction. This isn't just about pleasure. It's about the deep psychological reassurance that comes from being physically and emotionally accepted by someone they love. It helps regulate mood, reinforces trust, and gives men a sense of being appreciated not for their achievements, but for who they are. These biological responses combine to create a moment of emotional clarity, something men rarely experience, because their daily stresses, responsibilities, and suppressed emotions often block the clarity. What many people don't realize is how deeply these chemical changes affect men's ability to connect and communicate outside of intimacy. When stress levels drop, emotional openness rises. When anxiety decreases, presence increases. When a man feels bonded, he becomes more responsive, more patient, more affectionate. These aren't random shifts. They're biological responses that promote relationship harmony. The hormones released through meaningful connection help men soften their internal defenses, making room for emotional honesty and vulnerability. This is why intimacy can be deeply healing for a man's mental well-being. It isn't just a moment of closeness. It's a recalibration of the nervous system. It helps him let go of tension that he may have been holding for days, weeks, or even years. It allows him to step out of the performance-based mind that the world demands and into a space where he can simply be present. His body relaxes, his heart rate steadies, his mind quiets. These changes are not just comforting, they are restorative. They energize him emotionally and physically, allowing him to show up in his relationships with clarity instead of heaviness. When intimacy is rooted in trust and connection, it enhances emotional bonding in ways conversation alone sometimes cannot. It becomes a nonverbal dialogue of affection, reassurance, and unity. For men who struggle to express their feelings openly, these hormonal changes give them an internal environment that makes expression easier. They feel safer, calmer, more anchored, and those feelings translate into better communication, deeper empathy, and stronger connection. But none of these benefits happen in isolation. They occur because intimacy activates both the physical and emotional parts of a man's mind. It taps into his biology while also touching his heart. It reinforces the relationship not just in the moment, but long after the moment has passed. It builds a foundation of trust that ripples into everyday life. How he listens, how he responds, how he supports, how he loves. Understanding this science removes the stereotypes often attached to men's desires. It shows that intimacy is not shallow for them. It is deeply tied to their emotional health, their stress levels, and their ability to form secure, loving connections. When men experience these hormonal shifts through meaningful intimacy, they grow emotionally. They become more balanced, more grounded, and more emotionally available. In the end, these biological responses aren't just about desire. They are about connection, healing, bonding, and mental well-being. Intimacy becomes the bridge between a man's emotional world and the world around him. It allows him to feel safe enough to love fully, express fully, and show up fully both for himself and for the person he holds close. For many men, the deepest fulfillment in intimacy comes from something far beyond physical satisfaction. It comes from meaning, emotional presence, genuine connection, and the feeling that the moment is shared, not taken. Men may be biologically wired for desire, but they are emotionally wired for significance. They want to feel that the closeness they experience is not shallow or transactional, but rooted in trust, respect, and emotional authenticity. Physical touch without emotional grounding often leaves a man feeling empty, but meaningful connection-based intimacy leaves him feeling whole, centered, and deeply valued. When a man engages in intimacy without emotional presence, it may satisfy the body temporarily, but it does nothing for the heart. He may feel a spark of excitement but no warmth. He may feel physical release but no relational peace. That's because the body can experience a moment, but the heart cannot attach to something that feels hollow. A man can only feel deeply connected when the emotional and physical parts of him align. Meaningful intimacy provides that alignment. It becomes a space where he doesn't just feel desired, he feels understood. He doesn't just feel touched, he feels connected. Men often crave intimacy as a way to feel close, but what they truly crave, what brings them lasting fulfillment, is knowing that the closeness is mutual. They want to know that their presence matters, that their emotions matter, and that the person they are with is fully engaged with them, not just physically but emotionally. This is why communication, affection, and emotional transparency matter so much. When these elements are present, intimacy becomes a shared experience of trust rather than an isolated moment of physical interaction. Meaningful intimacy also invites a man to soften emotionally. It encourages him to be present rather than distracted, vulnerable rather than guarded, gentle rather than tense. It gives him the confidence to express deeper parts of himself, parts he may hide in daily life. When he feels emotionally connected, he stops treating intimacy as a performance and starts treating it as a partnership. He listens more, he pays attention more, he gives more freely. He becomes more attuned to the emotional rhythm between him and his partner, which makes the bond richer and healthier for both. Another powerful aspect of meaningful intimacy is that it helps men grow. When a man experiences emotional closeness, he becomes more comfortable communicating his needs, listening to his partner's needs, and engaging with compassion. The emotional presence he develops in intimate moments carries over into the rest of the relationship. He becomes more attentive in conversation, more patient during conflict, and more supportive during challenges. Meaningful connection in the intimate space strengthens the foundation of connection in everyday life. And this depth of connection benefits his emotional well-being as well. When intimacy is rooted in respect, trust, and mutual care, it reduces loneliness, strengthens self-esteem, and increases emotional resilience. A man feels emotionally fed, not just physically pleased. He feels stable, not anxious, secure, not uncertain. Connected, not alone. That emotional nourishment is what allows him to show up as a stronger, more grounded partner. Meaningful intimacy also nurtures the partnership itself. It deepens the bond, increases trust, and builds a cycle of emotional reciprocity where both individuals feel valued, respected, and emotionally balanced. When both partners show up with presence instead of pressure, connection instead of expectation, and sincerity instead of performance, intimacy becomes something transformative, something that elevates the relationship rather than simply satisfying a moment. Ultimately, men don't need intimacy just for release. They need intimacy for connection. They want to feel emotionally close, emotionally accepted, and emotionally understood. When intimacy is infused with meaning, it strengthens not only the man, but the relationship, the trust, and the emotional harmony between two people. It becomes a source of healing, bonding, and genuine closeness that lasts long after the moment ends. Understanding their own sexual and emotional needs is one of the most transformative steps a man can take toward personal growth. Many men move through life reacting to desire without ever exploring the deeper meaning behind it. They feel the impulse, they feel the need, they feel the longing, but they rarely pause to ask, what is this really about? When a man begins to understand the emotional roots of his desire, he unlocks a level of self-awareness that strengthens every part of his life, not just his relationships. Intimacy stops being a reflex and becomes a reflection. It stops being a habit and becomes a choice. It stops being an escape and becomes a form of emotional truth. When men take the time to understand why they crave intimacy, they begin to uncover parts of themselves they have ignored for years. Parts shaped by childhood experiences, unmet emotional needs. stress, loneliness, or the absence of emotional expression in their daily lives. This is not weakness. It is insight, and insight gives power. A man who understands what drives him is not controlled by impulse. He is guided by intention. He becomes stronger, not softer. He becomes more focused, not confused. He becomes emotionally aware, not emotionally reactive. This self-awareness naturally leads to healthier communication. When a man understands himself, he no longer struggles to express what he feels. He doesn't hide behind silence, frustration, or defensiveness. He communicates openly, calmly, and honestly because he actually knows what's happening inside him. He can say, I want closeness because I feel disconnected, or I need reassurance because I'm stressed, instead of acting out those emotions unconsciously. That level of honesty creates safety and trust within the relationship, making intimacy a shared emotional experience rather than a misunderstood one. Understanding his needs also helps a man break harmful habits. When he recognizes that his desire isn't just physical but emotional, he becomes far less likely to chase empty connections or quick gratification that leaves him feeling unfulfilled. He begins to prioritize meaningful intimacy over impulsive actions. He becomes more careful about where he invests his emotional energy. He becomes more responsible with his vulnerability and more mindful about who he shares it with. That shift alone can change the entire trajectory of a man's emotional and relational life. As this understanding deepens, men develop a more compassionate relationship with themselves. Instead of viewing their desires as something to hide or be ashamed of, they begin to see them as natural parts of their emotional makeup. This acceptance reduces internal conflict, improves self-esteem, and creates a sense of inner balance. A man who understands himself becomes more grounded and emotionally stable. His relationships benefit. His mental health benefits, his sense of purpose benefits. This growth radiates outward. When a man understands his emotional needs, he becomes a better partner. He becomes more attuned to what his partner needs. He becomes more considerate, more patient, more empathetic. Instead of approaching intimacy from a place of expectation, he approaches it from a place of connection. Instead of assuming, he asks. Instead of hiding, he shares. Instead of reacting, he listens. This level of emotional maturity transforms the relationship from the inside out. And the transformation doesn't stop there. Self-understanding strengthens a man's confidence. When he feels emotionally aligned, he carries himself differently. He feels more secure in who he is. He stops needing external validation because he finally understands his internal landscape. That confidence enriches his work, his friendships, his goals, and his sense of identity. So when men take the time to explore their emotional needs around intimacy, they are not becoming weaker. They are becoming wiser. They are stepping into a deeper, more authentic version of themselves. They are learning what drives them, what fulfills them, and what grounds them. And that understanding becomes the foundation for emotional clarity, healthier relationships, and long-term personal growth. When a man learns to honor his emotional and physical needs with honesty and maturity, he steps into a completely different version of himself. One that is more grounded, more confident, and more emotionally present. Healthy intimacy doesn't weaken a man, it strengthens him. It gives him stability, connection, and emotional security that ripple through every part of his life. When a man feels safe enough to express closeness, affection, and vulnerability, he becomes more than just physically connected, he becomes emotionally alive. He becomes a partner who brings depth instead of distance, presence instead of pressure, and compassion instead of confusion. When men embrace healthy intimacy, they begin to shed the old narratives that taught them to suppress, hide, or toughen up their emotional world. They stop viewing vulnerability as risk and start seeing it as strength. They stop masking their emotions behind silence or distraction and start showing up with clarity and openness. This shift changes everything. A man who feels safe expressing affection becomes a man who can also express frustration more calmly, stress more honestly, and love more freely. Emotional expression becomes a natural part of his identity, not a rare moment squeezed into a private corner of his life. Healthy intimacy also builds empathy. When men experience emotional connection, not just physical contact, they start to understand their partner on a deeper level. They become more attentive to cues, more aware of feelings, and more in tune with the emotional rhythm of the relationship. This doesn't happen because they suddenly become different people. It happens because intimacy lowers the internal barriers that keep them guarded. It quiets the inner noise. It makes room for awareness, patience, and understanding. A man who feels emotionally connected becomes a man who gives emotional connection. And that gift strengthens the relationship in ways that last far beyond the intimate moments themselves. This emotional presence also builds confidence, not the loud, performative confidence the world often expects from men, but the steady, grounded confidence that comes from emotional security. When a man feels valued, accepted, and connected, he carries himself differently. He feels less threatened by challenges, less reactive to stress, and less dependent on external validation. His sense of worth comes from inside the relationship, not outside himself. This makes him more stable, more consistent, and more capable of giving love without fear of losing himself in the process. Healthy intimacy also teaches men responsibility, not the heavy, burdened kind, but the meaningful kind. The kind where they understand the impact of their words, their actions, their energy. When a man honors intimacy with respect and care, he becomes someone who protects the emotional space of the relationship. He becomes someone who listens before reacting, who supports before withdrawing, who communicates before assuming. That emotional responsibility makes him a stronger partner, a more dependable presence, and a more compassionate person. And perhaps most importantly, healthy intimacy helps men heal. It allows them to let go of emotional wounds they've carried quietly for years. It helps them release tension, soften old fears, and replace emotional loneliness with genuine connection. When a man is in a relationship where he feels safe, respected, and emotionally understood, he begins to rewrite his internal story. He begins to believe that closeness is safe, that vulnerability is allowed, and that love is something he can both give and receive fully. Over time, this level of emotional strength transforms the relationship as well. It creates a partnership where trust grows naturally, where communication becomes easier, and where both partners feel valued and supported. It builds a cycle of love where each person feels safe being their true self, and that kind of relationship doesn't just survive, it thrives. So when men learn to honor their emotional and physical needs with maturity, they don't just create healthier intimacy, they create healthier lives. They become stronger partners, stronger individuals, and stronger humans.